Patient-Driven Payment Model, PDPM, is a new classification system for classifying skilled nursing facility patients in a Medicare Part A coverage stay into payment groups. Effective beginning October 1, 2019, PDPM replaced the current case mix classification system, the Resource Utilization Group version 4, or RUGS 4. Under RUGS 4, most patients are classified into a therapy payment group, which uses primarily the volume of therapy services provided to the patient as the basis for payment classification. PDPM eliminates the volume-driven therapy services and improves the overall accuracy and appropriateness of SNF payments by classifying patients into payment groups based on specific data-driven patient characteristics. PDPM is a complete departure from RUGS 4. PDPM will have a per diem payment, therapy minutes will no longer drive payment, patient characteristics or comorbidities will now drive payment. Total therapy delivery will be capped at 25% for group and concurrent treatments. And MDS coding, utilizing ICD-10 codes, will now drive payment. Under RUGS 4, there are several scheduled assessments throughout the resident's stay under Medicare Part A, including possible unscheduled assessments that may be triggered by different events during a patient's stay, such as when a patient starts therapy, ends therapy, or when there is a change in volume of therapy received by the patient or in the patient's status. Under PDPM, effective October 1, 2019, there are 3 PPS assessments: the 5-day assessment, the interim payment assessment or IPA, and the discharge assessment. Providers will have 8 days to determine reimbursement for the patient's entire Medicare Part A stay. PT and OT clinical components. Using ICD-10 codes, the patient's primary diagnosis is coded on the MDS in item I0020B. Based on the primary diagnosis, SNF patients are first classified into one of 10 PDPM clinical categories. The PDPM clinical category is then collapsed into one of 4 OT and PT clinical categories used for patient classification. For example, if a patient has a diagnosis of lung cancer, their PDPM clinical category will be cancer, and their OT and PT clinical category will be medical management. The resident's PT and OT clinical category and GG function score will determine the case mix for both PT and OT PDPM components. In our example, the resident was placed into a medical management clinical category. For this example, the resident scored a 3 on his GG admission assessment, so his PT and OT case mix group would be TI. Speech therapy clinical component. There are 5 steps to determine the speech therapy case mix. First, determine the patient's primary diagnosis using the ICD-10 code recorded in MDS item I0020B. Based on the primary diagnosis, the patient is first classified into one of 10 primary diagnosis clinical categories. The primary diagnosis clinical category is then collapsed into either non-neurologic or acute neurologic. Next, determine whether the patient has one or more speech therapy-related comorbidities. Then determine the presence of cognitive impairment through the BIMS or CPS assessment. Next, you will determine if there is a mechanically altered diet recorded in MDS item K0510C. Finally, determine if there is a swallowing disorder recorded in MDS item K0100. Next, we will determine the speech therapy case mix group using responses from the 5 steps. In this example, the patient only had a cognitive impairment, so we will select any one. Next, our patient had a swallowing disorder and is on a mechanically altered diet, so we select both. This will place our patient into the SLP case mix group of SF. Non-therapy ancillary component. The NTA classification is determined by the presence of certain conditions or the use of certain extensive services that were found to be correlated with increases in NTA costs for skilled nursing facility patients. For our example, this patient has an admitting diagnosis of COPD, end-stage liver disease, and diabetes. Now we will determine whether the patient has had any additional NTA-related comorbidities by examining the conditions and services in the table. A tier system accounts for differences in costliness. The score is a weighted count of comorbidities and extensive services. Points are assigned for each comorbidity or extensive service, with more points awarded for higher cost tiers. In our example, the patient has been diagnosed with COPD, diabetes, and end-stage liver disease. This gives our patient an NTA score of 5. This will place our patient into an NTA case mix group of ND. Nursing clinical components. PDPM utilizes the same basic nursing classification structure as RUGS 4 with certain modifications. The function score is now based on section GG of the MDS 3.0. Collapsed functional groups reduce the number of nursing groups from 43 to 25. To account more accurately for the variability in patient costs over the course of a stay, under PDPM, an adjustment factor is applied and changes the per diem rate over the course of the stay. For the PT and OT components, days 1 through 20 are paid at 100%. Every 7 days after day 20, there is a 2% decrease in reimbursement. For the NTA component, days 1, 2, and 3 are paid at 3 times the daily rate because non-therapy ancillary costs were found to be highly concentrated at the beginning of a resident's Medicare Part A stay. Key points to remember. PDPM will take effect October 1st, 2019. There are 5 main components to PDPM: physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, non-therapy ancillary, and nursing. ICD-10 coding and patient characteristics will drive reimbursement. Under PDPM, there are 3 assessments: the admission assessment, the interim payment assessment or IPA, and discharge assessment. The PT and OT and NTA components are applied a variable per diem rate to adjust for costs over the patient's Medicare Part A stay.